You're watching Friday edition of News Mongolia. Today is April 8. For our top stories, the investment climate was the main topic of the Mongolian Economic Forum on the second day. Asian Development Bank projects Mongolia's economic growth to expand by 2.3% in 2022. Mongolian Economic Forum 2022. Discussion on rural and urban recovery held. For other news, stay tuned. The open session Rural and Urban Recovery was held today at the Mongolian Economic Forum 2022 at Government Palace. The session was attended by the Deputy Prime Minister Amarsahan Samboyang, the Mayor of Ulaanbaatar City, Sumyabatar, the Program Manager of the International Organization for Migration, UN Migration, Viktor Lutenko, and other officials.
Although Mongolia is a top 10 ranked country in terms of land area per capita, the capital city Ulaanbaatar, accounting for only about 0.3% of the country's total land territory, is home to nearly 50% of the country's total population. The continued disparities between rural and urban areas result in the intensification of migration from rural areas towards urban areas. Thus, it has become necessary to develop province centers into independent cities, increase the competitiveness of rural areas, ensure consistent policy support for the agricultural sector, and accelerate development projects in Ulaanbaatar to ensure sustainable development in both rural and urban areas.
The capital's problem is the density of 1.6 million people in the economy. Last year, the capital city's budget was increased by 29 billion MT to 900 billion. Therefore, the base of urban development is like an independent economy. Now we all develop our city with proper planning, urban development and digital innovation. Research estimates and feasibility studies are being prepared. On the other hand, we need to talk about border and rural development. Rural development is lagging far behind. Ulaanbaatar's economy has reached 28 trillion MNT, producing about 74% of GDP, 150,000 enterprises, 96% of universities and colleges, and 86% of the country's turnover. So I want to come up with a bold and meaningful solution. The solution is to increase the legal capacity and make the system right.
Within the framework of the regional economic development policy, the discussion was geared toward determining the opportunities and solutions needed to meet domestic food demand and increase exports by supporting sustainable growth within the agricultural and light industry sectors through the participation of both the public and private sectors.
Our country has a small population but a large territory, and the vast majority of the population is young. Where is the modern development in Ulaanbaatar city? Young people tend to follow development. As a result, young people are settling in the city. There are very few people in the slums who follow the civil service. Therefore, if we can create development in Zamiut, Tsanur, Altamolak and the Hushik Valley free zones in line with regional development, concentration will slow down. This will be accompanied by economic development and job creation. For example, the construction of an oil refinery in Altenshiresum of Dorngol province will create 500 to 1,000 jobs. The establishment of a satellite city of Ulaanbaatar city needs to be coordinated with a rural development policy.
Citizens participated in the Urban and Rural Revival Open Session and raised issues such as the relocation of large markets and shopping centers, universities, and incentives for people to move to rural areas.
Mongolian Economic Forum's second day main topic was the investment climate. The keynote speech was given by Michael Miketo, partner and director at the Boston Consulting Group. Panelists discussed the issue of the investment sector in Mongolia. Details from Byamsurung Ochirbat.
The objectives of this open session on the investment climate are to incorporate input from the participants and to discuss the challenges and opportunities in the investment climate. A total of $35.6 billion has been invested in Mongolia since 1990. Geology and mining account for 70% of this. 17% is in the trade and services sector. 3% in banking and finance, 1% in construction and infrastructure, 1% in transportation, and 1% in light industry.
Yeah, so when you look at foreign investment trends in the world, in the last 5-6 years, you saw a decrease in the share of foreign investment going to developing economies. There's a few broader drivers about that, things around resourcing of supply chains away from more difficult environments, trade policy-wise. And also, I think in terms of COVID-19, there was a hesitancy to get out into the developing world. Well, foreign investment comes looking for one of three things: access to resources, be they natural resources or human resources, access to markets, right? And then the third thing that they look for, would be basically access to an acceptable cost base, a low cost base. So when you look at Mongolia, you've got great human and natural resources. You have some market access that can probably be grown in the future. And so I think these things are very interesting for Mongolia. Mongolia does have low cost, but I think it shouldn't try to compete on low cost alone. I think it should compete on its natural and human resources.
As part of new revival policy, legal and systemic changes are being made to the investment climate, such as the revised version of investment law and establishment of foreign investment and foreign trade agency. Moreover, the reforms will ensure the facilitation and promotion of new investments, the stability of investments, elimination of legal duplication and loopholes related to investors, simplification of multi-level government inspections, and digitalization at all levels of government services.
I think currently the government should invest in the development of domestic infrastructure. Because I think in the coming 2 or 3 years, foreign direct investment may be less compared to previous decades. However, at this moment, the domestic infrastructure, especially traffic congestion, is a serious problem, and the traffic congestion hindered the development of the domestic industry. So that's why I think the government should focus the investment to mitigate the negative situation, including traffic congestion. So the big infrastructure project is the construction of new international airport, and I think by construction of this new airport, connectivity with other countries was greatly improved.
Through the discussion, all the stakeholders, including the public and private sectors, international organizations and financial institutions, civil society and academia have had the opportunity to propose solutions to be incorporated into draft laws that could have a significant positive impact on the investment climate.
During the Mongolian Economic Forum, state representatives, national and international enterprises, banks, financial institutions, and foreign and domestic investors are discussing the next steps for economic growth and reaching mutual consensus on finding solutions.
The main focus was the message that Mongolia, as an economy that is facing all these international shocks, they need to react to them accordingly. And what do I mean by that? Inflation is high everywhere, including Mongolia. So monetary policy needs to adjust more rapidly to these conditions by interest rates rising. It's important. It's important to let the exchange rate fluctuate so that whatever shock that happens, the exchange rate helps the country to absorb those shocks. By doing that, by basically focusing on interest rate and let the exchange rate vary, there will be less need for doing things like exchange control and the control of FX in the market. The second message is the need for fiscal consolidation. It's incredibly important right now. Mongolia did very well supporting citizens during COVID, but that came at a very high fiscal cost. So now it's time to do the fiscal adjustment that Mongolia did from 2017 to 2019, when debt to GDP ratio declined by 20 percentage points. It's going to be hard because the war between Russia and Ukraine is made this international situation worse, but it's time to do it.
Event comes to a very good time because we just coming out of a pandemic. Now we are facing the impact of a war, and I think finding solutions which are really very much private sector focused and support the government policy, specifically the new recovery policy, will be important. I think here, to get the feedback from the audience, to get the feedback from the expert, will help to shape the policy even further. As EBRD here in the country, we are very much focusing on private sector, but also we are supporting the government in specific areas, like transmission lines, renewable energy, green recovery, green transition. And we just started a new project with the Ministry of Economic Development in regard to identifying a portfolio of green investment projects to attract foreign direct investments into the country.
The attendees also indicated that the government must aim to develop a legal environment that supports private investments in the implementation of projects and programs aimed at improving both transport and logistic capacity, increasing efficiency of transport corridors to support regional, social and economic development. The discussion are also aiming to support the expansion of foreign and domestic tourism through the effective implementation of an air transport sector liberalization and contribute to the recovery of the country's economy.
Mongolia's economic growth is expected to be constrained by high inflation, persistent trade disruptions, tighter external financing conditions, and complex geopolitical risks before accelerating in 2023 as COVID-19 concerns and trade disruptions ease, according to a new report issued by the Asian Development Bank this week.
In its flagship economic report, ADO 2022, the ADB projects Mongolia's economic growth to expand by 2.3% in 2022 compared to the 1.4% growth in 2021, before climbing to 5.6% in 2023, supported by domestic demand, investments, and recovery in industry, agriculture, and services. MNB World reporter Anirkan Batter talked to Mr. Pavit Ramachandran, ADB's country director for Mongolia, and discussed about the economic forecast for 2022 during the Mongolian Economic Forum.
In September last year, we had projected 6% growth for 2022, but we've now revised it down to 2.3% for this year. And this is primarily on account of two exogenous shocks. As you know, the border has been closed with PRC since October last year. And this is really impacting both exports in an environment where commodity prices are quite favorable, but also imports. But we're also seeing now with the war in Ukraine, the issue about import prices and supply chain disruptions. So as a result of these twin crises, the growth has been revised down to 2.3%. This is having an impact in terms of the negative merchandise trade surplus. So net exports are actually dragging down growth, but also pressures on the current account. So current account deficit has gone up, pressure on balance of payments, and we're seeing a depletion of foreign exchange reserves, and the pressure on the tukruk, the currency as well. So the net effect of all of this is our outlook for this year has been is more subdued at 2.3%. We expect with the border opening up, trade picking up, industrial output picking up, that next year we should see a pickup in the economic growth.
According to the Asian Development Bank, growth prospects in 2022-2023 will depend heavily on when the major trade portals with the PRC will reopen, whether there is a renewed COVID-19 issue, and how Mongolia responds to economic pressure from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Persistently high inflation and the continued trade disruptions limit monetary and fiscal policy room, requiring a comprehensive macroeconomic policy adjustment plan to safeguard the economy.
I think Mongolia had a very strong track record from 2017 to 2020 in terms of fiscal management, debt management. They were able to reduce public debt to GDP by 30 percentage points. They even built up a bit of a surplus. And I think that prudent macroeconomic management was what allowed Mongolia to also enact its COVID policy. So Mongolia did very well in terms of its COVID management and is now able to then focus on recovery. Unfortunately, you have this situation now with these two exogenous shocks happening at the same time. So I think the focus will need to be to ensure that the recovery efforts are balanced with macroeconomic management, prudent macroeconomic management, debt management, ensuring stability of the financial sector. Right now, perhaps immediately the focus is on addressing this crisis, but down the road we want to look at fiscal consolidation. So you're moving to more sustainable fiscal debt metrics, but also you have to continue to focus on attracting private sector investment, because a lot of the projected recovery efforts, infrastructure investments cannot be driven only through public sector because fiscal space is now constrained. So we'd say a combination of bringing in private sector, looking at bankable projects and then identifying private sector or even public-private partnerships, but also focusing on revenue mobilization. This was one of the theme chapters in our Asian Development Outlook that was released yesterday. So looking at tax mobilization, both through efficient tax management, tax administration, but also expanding the tax net. And there were a few suggestions put out in terms of value-added tax being increased, looking at progressive taxation on personal income tax, areas like that, so that you have a broad and wider tax net as well.
Average inflation will accelerate further to 12.4% in 2022 as supply shocks and trade disruptions continue, and significantly higher fuel prices translate into higher business costs. Mongolian tugruk depreciation will pass through the prices for imported goods, but inflation is forecast to moderate to 9.3% in 2023 as these factors ease.
Now let's take a look at the currency exchange rates provided by Mongol Bank. Here comes the weather forecast for the world's major cities. This is it for today. Thank you for staying with us. We'll see you tomorrow with more news updates. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.